Good morning and welcome to our fourth webinar for the collection management course and manual implementation. I just wanted to, before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone that this course is not just about doing the course, it's an action-oriented course, and the action part is the most important. So that's why I wanted to mention the manual implementation part of this. So if you are doing the course, even if you're not doing it, I hope you have started with your manual implementation in your institution. And if you haven't, I hope you'll get started. So welcome again. And I'll just like to introduce our panelists. We have Michelle Hamer, whom you all know, the NSCF lead. She's going to help us with the information, as well as Chanel Ribeiro, the NSCF project manager. And we also have Audrey Ndaba, the NSCF collections management coordinator. So Audrey will not be presenting, but she will be present as a panelist. So hopefully, even if you have any questions that relate to her, she will be able to answer those. And just a welcome back to Audrey. We've missed her so much. Moving on to the next slide, before we get started, we need to get through the webinar guidelines of engagement. If you can please keep your contributions helpful and considerate of the hosts and other attendees. So just be kind, be nice. Yeah, when you chat on the chat box or when you ask a question, if you can be nice, that will be very appreciated. You can use the chat box to say hello to everyone. You can start doing this now. Thank you, Cameron, who started with this. Yeah, I see Mahlati is there. And you can keep it coming. Say hello to everyone. There's Derek Holder. Thank you everyone for joining us. You can just keep say good morning and let us know where you are coming from, which institution, and your name. That's very important. It's good to start with greetings. So yeah, let's get that going. Keep doing it. And then we can get started. You can use the Q&A box to add your questions. I'm sure that you'll have questions throughout the webinar as presenters are presenting. But if you can just put your questions in the Q&A box, and so that we don't miss them. We'll be answering them at the end of the webinar. If we don't get enough time to answer all the questions, you can just put your questions in the webinar link. So we are going to be loading the recording to YouTube, and we are live on Facebook. So you can put your questions either on Facebook or on YouTube, and we will get them answered. Please remember to visit our website on the collections management page. If you need any information about the course, everything is there, videos, assignments, everything. even presentations, you can get them there. It's nscf.org.za. If you go under resources and then collections management, you will find yourself there. Now we can get started with our webinar. I'm going to hand over to Michelle, who will get us started. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Fulu, and good morning, everybody. So today's webinar is about risk mitigation. So in the last webinar, we talked about doing a risk assessment, and we said that that was critical to understand the risks to collections so that we can allocate resources, and that's our staff, time, and money, and to make sure that we're allocating those resources to the most important risks and to protect the most important collections. And we said that that risk assessment is critical to be able to motivate to our governance structures or our funders to access more resources to effectively protect the collections and the staff. And we, so that we can develop and implement plans to reduce risks to the collections and staff. So we covered that in the last webinar. We spent some time in the discussion forum. But what about what happens next? So once you've identified those risks and you've prioritized them, then what? And how do you plan to address the risks? And what exactly are you going to allocate funding and time to doing? So that's what we're going to be covering today. So what next? Once you've done the assessment, then what's the next step? Next slide. So to start off with, I just want to do a recap of what we covered, and just so that we all understand the context of what we're talking about. So next slide. So what we said is that risk can be defined as the chance of something happening that will have a negative impact on our objectives. And our objective is to preserve the collections in the long term. What are the risks to us achieving that? And we said that there's a risk. The whole thing about risk management involves a number of steps. So identifying the risks, analyzing them, prioritizing them, and then developing a response plan for priority risks to remove or reduce the impacts of those risks. And that's what we're going to focus on today, that orange highlighted text. Next slide. So just a reminder, we used this wheel, and it's from ICROM. So it's about heritage resources, but it's equally relevant to natural science collections. So this is the wheel, and today we're going to be looking at the end part of the wheel, so treating the risks and monitoring the risks. Next slide. So what we said in the first webinar on risk was to identify the risks. So what can go wrong and cause damage and loss to the value of the collections? And that was the first thing. And to think about it in the context of the 10 agents of deterioration that are relevant for the collections. So different types of collections will have different agents of deterioration that are more relevant for them. Next slide. And so these are the areas that could have a negative impact. So physical forces, disassociation, which is losing information, and whether that's knowledge of staff or data or labels disintegrating. So it's disassociation is where you lose the relevant information for the collection. Incorrect relative humidity, incorrect temperature, light and UV, pollutants, pests, water, fire, and criminals. So those are the 10 agents that can cause damage to collections. Next slide. And what ICROM suggests is that you also look at the 6 layers of enclosure. So from the container or the support for an individual object to the fitting, they call it the fitting, but it's shelves or cabinets that they're stored in, to the storage room, to the building, to the site, and to the region. So you've got to look at each of those layers to identify risks, as well as the agents of deterioration. Next slide. And then once you've identified the risks, to also think about what type of risk is it. So some risks may be a rare event, only happen about once every 100 years. That might be something like an earthquake, a typhoon, or a hurricane. Some might be common events. They happen many times per century. Or it could be a cumulative process. So it can occur continuously or intermittently. So it's not a specific event. It's something that happens over time. All right, next slide. And then we said once you've identified the risks, then you have to analyze them. So how big are those risks? Which ones can we live with? And which ones can't we live with? And how do we prioritize them? How do we know which is the most important risk? Next slide. So there were different ways of looking at risks, the chance of occurrence. So if it's an event, how often is it expected to occur? If it's a cumulative effect, how fast will the damage occur? Is it something that will happen within a year? You could lose the whole collection, or is it over 1,000 years, or is it over 20 years? So how fast? Either how often or how fast. And then the impact, there's two different elements to the impact. How severe will the effect be? And that's to individual objects. So will you only have some damage to an object, or will it completely destroy an object? And then how much of the collection will be impacted in this way? So it might be that only a small, so you might lose all the objects, but it might only be in a very small portion of the collection, or it might be some damage, but across the whole collection. So those two aspects also need to be analyzed. All right, next slide. And we said once you do this analysis of risk, you can see, so something that would have total loss of impact and happens either very fast or very often would be a red, a catastrophic impact or catastrophic risk. So you can prioritize the risks in this way. Next slide. So you can do a score, you can do a calculation and calculate the magnitude of risk. And this is, you have a score for A, a score for B, and a score for C, and those are out of 5 each, between 1 and 5. Component A quantifies the frequency of the damaging event or the rate of occurrence of a process. And then B and C look at the expected loss of value to the collection. So B is the damage to individual objects, how much damage to individual objects, and C is how much of the collection would be impacted. So that will give you a score when you add those three up, a score between 3 and 15. Next slide. And then there's this kind of scale. So once you've calculated that magnitude of risk, you'll know whether it's a catastrophic risk, which would mean that the entire collection is expected to be completely lost in 1 year. That's catastrophic. And then there's extreme, there's high, medium, and low priority. So, you know, risks that are medium or low priority, it might be fine, you just accept them, you live with them. But anything really over 9.5, so where it's high risk, you need to have an intervention or mitigation, an action that will remove or reduce the risk. Next slide. And so that's what we're looking at today. What are those actions that you can take to remove or mitigate, remove or reduce the risk? And I'll hand over to Chanel now.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so as Michelle said, so once you've completed all these previous steps, identifying and evaluating your risks, you look at the actions that can be taken to reduce the impact of the risk or remove it completely. And we started looking at the 6 layers of enclosure. Think about each layer of enclosure and how you can intervene at each layer to remove or reduce the risk. For example, fire is a major risk in most collections. What can you do at each of the 6 layers of enclosure to reduce the risk of fire occurring or the impact of a fire? Look at the containers that the objects are stored in, the cabinets, the storeroom, the building, and also the conditions outside the building. Examples of actions you can take are moving the specimens to metal cabinets, installing smoke detectors, fire suppression system, or a fire door, or the removal of flammable materials from corridors, removal of overhanging trees or vegetation growing on buildings. And then also training of all staff in the building in firefighting and establishing links with the local fire department and having an emergency response plan for fire. And then another tool to develop risk treatment options is to think about 5 different stages to control the risks. So the first one is avoid. So avoid the cause of the risk or everything that makes the risk higher. This is the first logical thing to do and the most effective when possible. Secondly, or the second option is to block the agents of deterioration. If it's not possible to avoid the risk, the next logical action is to put a protective barrier somewhere between the asset or object and the source of the agent. Number 3 is detect. So detect the agents of deterioration and their effects on the object. It's important to monitor the different agents so that we can react quickly in case they threaten or begin to damage the object. But detection alone is not enough. We need to respond effectively whenever a problem is detected. And so the next one is then respond. So you should respond to the presence and damaging action of the agent. This stage includes all planning and preparations to enable a quick and effective response. Detect and respond should always be considered together when we're developing options to reduce risks. And then finally, recover from the damage and losses caused. So if everything else fails, the only option is to try to recover the items or parts of the collection affected. And various actions can be taken to ensure successful recovery. For example, to have complete and updated documentation of specimens, to have a budget allocated for emergency, a budget to have insurance, and then also expertise identified and contacted in advance of any event. So these 5 stages of control include both preventative and reactive measures to reduce risks to our collections. Of course, prevention is much more important and more effective than reaction. However, good risk management always integrates these 2 types of actions in order to achieve the best results. Okay. So for each risk to be treated, we can use a table like this one to help us think about all the possible options in a systematic way. At each layer of enclosure, think about which type of action or stage of control could be introduced or improved. Remember that it's not necessary and sometimes not even possible to fill all the cells in the table, but all possible options should be considered. So what are all the possible actions that could be carried out? If you get stuck with this exercise, look at chapter 4 and chapter 7 in the collections management manual. And remember that reducing the impacts of risks is usually about meeting accepted standards and following procedures. So at this point, I'm going to give over to Fulu, who will run this exercise that we all are going to do together. Thanks, Fulu.
Thank you, Chanel. Can I please share? All right. So this exercise, I'm going to send you now, and with the link, you can just complete. You'll complete the table, but it's a bit different on the app that we're going to use. We're going to use Jamboard. So I am just sending you the link. If you can just open the link as I speak, and then we can get going. I'm going to share my screen just so that I can show you how you're going to do it. Okay, so we have 5 pages. The first page is avoid, the second block, the third detect, the fourth respond. We're not going to be doing the last one that was shared on the table. So what we're going to do, so these are the layers of enclosure and the stages of control. So the layers of enclosures are the region, site, building, and so on. And the stages of control are avoiding, blocking, and so on. Right, I hope everyone understands. So what you're going to do, we are going to have to give you 3 minutes on each page, right? And then what you need to do is to put sticker notes. So if you come here, there's a sticker note, you click on it, you write whatever, and you can pick the color that you want. And if you click on save, and if you cancel here, you can move your sticker note to wherever you want to. If you're going to put it under building, you just put it there. And to create another one, you do the same. You save it and you drag it to wherever you want. I hope that's you understood that. It's quite simple. And once the 3 minutes is finished, I am going to ask you to stop and we move to the next page and you do the same thing. Right. So we have 3 minutes. So what you need to do is put the actions that you would take to avoid. On this page, we're doing the avoid. Actions you would take to avoid fire, right? The actions of fire or the risk of fire in the region, the site, the building, the collection room, and so on. You shouldn't worry too much about filling each of the layers of enclosure. Whatever comes to mind first, just do that, right? Okay, so you can start. Everyone will be seeing what's happening on the screen. So you can start.
So it seems like some people can't access it. There's a limit to how many people can access the Jamboard, but I've asked people to just then type their answer in the chat box.
Okay, thanks, Jenna.
It looked like someone deleted the whole page.
I was wondering what happened.
Can you press undo? Will it undo what the...
Oh,
no,
no,
okay.
it only undoes what I did. I hope the person, if it was you, whoever deleted, yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
You have 1 minute left on this page.
I'll come in here, Fulu. So just, I think this is a good exercise just to show how we have to think. So this page is about avoiding. So how can you completely avoid fire, not block it? So the next page is on block, and that's putting a barrier between your collection objects and the agent of deterioration. So putting a barrier between the collection and fire. This is how do you make sure that fire does not happen in your collection or in your building. So just think about that carefully.
Thanks, Michelle. So time is up for this page. We will be moving on to the next page. If you can just assign your stickers to wherever you wanted them to go. Okay. On this next page, you need to put stickers on the actions you would take to block a fire from taking place. Blocking a fire. Let's say a fire, there's a fire maybe in one part of the building or next to the building that you're in. How can you block that fire? You can start.
Khutso, you raised your hand?
Yes, I'm struggling to type in my comments.
Can you do it in the chat box then? Yeah, on the webinar. I think that will be easier if you do it there, and then Fulu can maybe just copy and paste it to a sticky for you.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me try.
For those who don't understand, what actions can you take? What can you do to block a fire from your collections? That's basically it. What can you do to block a fire from entering or damaging your collections? You can, what actions can you take in your region? Let's say, for example, I'll use the example that I know, the National Herbarium. The region that it's in is, so it's in Brumeria, in Pretoria, and the site is in a botanical garden. The building is the herbarium building, and the collection room, we can choose wing A, and the fittings, which are cabinets or shelves. So those cabinets where specimens are kept, and the packaging, the specimens are pressed, so they are in folders. That's where the specimen is. What actions can you take to block a fire from that region, from that site, from that building, from that collection room, that cabinet, and from reaching that specimen in that container or in that folder? I hope that makes sense. You have 5 seconds left on this page. If you can just assign your sticky notes quickly. Okay. I see there's still more coming, but we'll move on to the next page. So what actions can you take to detect a fire at the different levels or at the different layers? What actions can you take to detect a fire? You can start. Chanel, can I ask you if you're able, or Audrey, to assign those sticky notes, the sticky notes from the chat?
I don't see Audrey here anymore. I can't get in now. There's too many people in. I didn't open the link for you, but we can do it afterwards as well. Yes.
Okay. Those putting their inputs in the comments, can you just indicate which stage of control it should fall under, and which layer of enclosure it should go under, so that we know where to assign the sticky note? Looks like in all the pages, there's a lot of actions that can be done, that can be taken in the building. It's interesting. We have a minute left on this page, and then we'll move to the final page. Ten seconds. Okay, time up. We move to the next page, the last one. So what actions can you take to respond to a fire? There is a fire. How do you respond to it? In your region, in the region side, building, collection room, fittings, packaging, or container. Thank you for starting. You can start. I see someone is drawing there. If you can just select the sticky note, it's easier that way. I see Philani's chat. So to respond, he says, evacuate everyone from the burning building. That's a good one. I don't think many people thought about that. Less than a minute left. So even after we close the exercise, if you have some last minute things that you want to do, you can keep doing them if you have the link. 10 seconds left.
Hopefully, if you can just keep your screen up when they're done and just go to the first page.
Okay. Right, so time is up. I'll go to the first page and take you back to Chanel.
Okay, so I'll come in here. So let's just have a look. So there was some great suggestions of actions that have come through here. And I think when we first started this exercise, people were putting everything into this. But as we went along, I think you could see the different stages. So avoid is, how do we make sure that a fire doesn't happen? And there were some good ones here. You know, about the packaging, about the fittings, about the collection room, and then the building, the site, and the region. So that was quite good. The next one. Yeah, so block. So this is, how do you put a barrier between the fire and your specimens or your collection? And there were also some good things, yeah. So if you look at some of these, so you've got to think quite carefully, is this blocking or is it avoiding? So if you're putting overhanging, if you're managing overhanging trees, that's not putting a barrier, that's actually avoiding. So usually what would happen is if the trees were on fire, they would, that fire would spread. So to avoid a fire, you would cut down the trees. But the fire-resistant walls and doors, that's a block. That's a barrier between the fire. So that's a good one. Metal cabinets, that's a barrier, that's a blocking. The fire extinguishers, that's not a barrier, that's going to be a prevention. So, or, you know, so once you've detected fire, then you will use the fire extinguishers. And then the packaging, so this was good, use fire retardant packaging. So that's your barrier, again, your fireproof containers, it's your barrier. That was good. Your region, it's very difficult to isolate yourself from the region. So in the Western Cape, where you're in the fynbos, where it's prone to fires at times of the year, big fires, it's very difficult to avoid or to block unless you were completely sealed off from what's happening around you. And the same with the site. So you can see some of these things, it's very difficult to actually find an action. Next one. I think this next one was good. The detecting, people understood. So yes, detecting, keeping abreast with disaster news. So you always have to be aware, alert if there's a fire nearby. You know, your links to the emergency services. So that would be a response. Your smoke detectors, that's exactly right. But that smoke detector should probably be in your building, not at the site. So that would move. And then doing your risk assessment every 3 months, that would probably also be for your building, maybe for your site as well. Monitoring the state of your collection. So that would be part of doing your fire inspection. So you would usually have to do a fire inspection. So checking your extinguishers, checking that there's nothing lying around that could catch fire. So it's doing your inspection. And being part of the community. Yeah, so that's WhatsApp groups, that's good, but I would move that to the region probably. So somebody, those WhatsApp groups, people will say there's a fire on Table Mountain, it's spreading towards Kirstenbosch, and then you can start to respond. So that's good. So some good ones came out there. Next one. This is the last one. So if you've detected fire, how are you going to respond? And yes, there were lots of people who were just going to run. They were going to just get out that building, evacuate. Some people, I think Sifalani said he's going to rescue some of these specimens. So yeah, so you can see, you really need a very good plan to respond if there's a fire. But yes, people have by this stage have got the understanding of how we think about these actions. So yeah, you could respond at a region, you can respond on your site, you can respond in the building, but there's very little you can do once there's a fire to respond to your packaging and your container. It's too late. So yeah, and you're not going to be able to move into cabinets when there's a fire. So this is like, how do you respond when you've detected a fire? Yeah, you would activate your fire retardant systems. That's exactly right. Fire detectors would go into the detecting action or stage. All right, so fully, if we can save this, I think it's very useful and we can use it again. So that was great. Thank you very much for that. And I'll give back to Chanel now.
Okay, yes, thanks everyone. I think that was a good exercise to get the brain juices flowing and thinking about what actions are possible. And we will be looking at this again at the discussion forum next week and exercises that we're going to do there. So after considering all possibilities to reduce priority risks based on the different combinations of layers and stages, we'll end up with many options. And which ones are the best? To select the best options for reducing a given risk, we should think about a few things. How much does the option reduce the risk? Does it eliminate the risk completely? Does it reduce most of the risk? Or does it bring about only some or small risk reduction? Our main goal is to find options that reduce most, if not all, of each priority risk. We also have to look at how much does it cost to implement the option. Remember that some options can have initial costs and in the following years, some maintenance costs. Does the option reduce more than one risk? For example, cleaning up all paper, wood, and other discarded materials from the collection rooms and corridors reduces the risk for pests and fire. And then is the option feasible? Does it conflict with other options? Does the option create new risks to the collections? So once you've identified options to reduce or remove the risks, you should select the best option. Just change the slide, sorry. You should select the best option. Remember that it's not always feasible to implement all the options. So reading through the options in this table, can you write down the 3 options that you would choose in the chat box? Which ones do you think would be the most effective? So you can write down the numbers. If you select 5, 9, and 1, write those down in the chat box now, just to run through some of them. So if we look at option 1, remove vegetation outside that could spread fire to the building. The risk reduction is 20% and the cost is quite low, it's 16,000, it's not a lot. But if we look at option 8, metal cabinets for entire collection, the cost is huge and the risk reduction is 40%. So just take a minute or two to read through all of these and then please write in the chat box which 3 options you would choose. I see a lot of people chose a number 8 and the cost is very big. So you have to also think about, what budget is available. And if you don't have that budget at the moment, look at the next best option that you can implement first until you can raise funds to have metal cabinets installed. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to give over to Michelle now.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting to see there was quite a variety of answers that came through there. But it would be a matter of balancing the impact with the cost. So, and also the importance of your collection. So if you look at number 7, it's only going to protect the types, but it's cheap and it would very effectively protect a really important part of your collection, the types. And so that I would say 7 is a very, very important one. And maybe 9 is also really important. And the others, you could probably do a lot of them for very little cost. And the more you can do, the more you're reducing the risk. Okay, next slide. Okay, so once you've identified all the actions that you're going to take, all the mitigation actions, you need to plan it. So it's the risk treatment plan. So just saying we're going to install a fire detection system, that's an action, but you need a detailed plan to implement that. So what are all the steps needed to get your fire detection system installed? What are all the steps needed to get the vegetation cleared? It's not like just having a statement will make sure it happens. There's a whole lot of planning. So you've got to think about how long will it take, who will be responsible, who needs to be involved, and what materials or equipment are needed to do it, and how much funding is needed. So there's a detailed plan behind each of your actions that you select. So the risk treatment plan should be part of the institution's overall management and strategic plan. This is not something that happens separately. It should be part of the whole institution's plan for the year, plan for 3 years, so that money is allocated, so that it's part of people's work plan. And everybody needs to know about this risk treatment plan. So everybody in the institution should be aware of it. The council or your board should be aware of it. The manager, the scientists, the curators, the collection staff, everybody should know. These are the risks. These are the high priority ones. These are the actions we're going to take. And this is the planned steps for achieving it. All right, next slide. So once you've got your plan and you implement your plan, then you also have to make sure that you check, how is it working? And you might need to adjust it. So sometimes you can be doing too much of something and it's not having any impact. Or you can be doing something, but you need to do more of it to really have the impact. So you need to be checking, you need to be monitoring that everything that you've put in place and you've done is actually working. And we've talked about documentation for collections. That was one of the early webinars. And again, all your monitoring, all your checking needs to be documented. So when you do your fire inspection, you need to document it. When you're monitoring, not just fire, I mean, we've been talking fire, but there's also all the others, your temperature monitoring, your ethanol concentration and levels monitoring, your pest monitoring and checks. All of that must be documented. Because if it's just in people's heads or on scraps of paper, it becomes very hard to use that information and to make decisions. You need to be able to make decisions based on the data that you collect in your monitoring and checking. And this risk assessment and analysis, you can redo it at regular intervals to see if the scores have changed. So once you've put in place all of these mitigation measures, you should start to see that your catastrophic risks have come down. They should be reduced. You shouldn't have such a high risk anymore. You know, the risk of your ethanol concentrations being wrong and specimens deteriorating because of that, the risk of losing data, you should have mitigation in place. And so you can actually shift your magnitude of risk score. All right, next slide. And so you can see it's this wheel. So we've gone all the way around the wheel now. We defined the context, we identified, analyzed, evaluated the risks. We've come up with options to mitigate or treat that risk. And then we monitor what we've implemented. And then we'll do another analysis, another evaluation. So it's a wheel, it keeps going around. Right, so it's a whole risk management process that is really critical to protecting the collections and managing them in a very professional way rather than just ad hoc, do things sometimes, respond however people think may be right on that day. It's having this whole plan in place. Okay, next slide. So I think we're at the end now. So for the people doing the course, this is the 4th assignment. And for everybody implementing the manual, if you're not part of the course, you can think about doing this anyway. You're going to have to do this whole risk management plan. For the assignment, what we're suggesting or what we're asking that you do, from the risk assessment that you did for the previous assignment, select the catastrophic and extreme risks, don't do more than 5, and come up with a risk treatment plan. So you'll look at all the risk mitigation options by layer of enclosure and the stages like we did in that Jamboard. And then you'll select the best option. So you can do a table like the one where we had all the percentages where you selected. Select the best options. We're just saying just pick for one of your risks and then develop a risk treatment plan for the option selected. So it's not doing everything, but it's working through some examples, producing some examples. And again, this would be better as a group assignment. But if you're the only one from your institution, you can work as an individual, but try and get some input from others in your organization. And I will provide templates again for you to use as a guide. So that will be the tables that you can populate, as well as some more guidelines for you. And it's an exercise, so don't get too, so for the people doing the course, if you're doing this for real for your institution, then you have to be a bit more accurate about the cost. So if you don't know how much it would cost to replace your wooden cabinets with metal ones, you can Google and try and get some information. You can ask around. It's an estimate. So it's not essential for the assignment that it's 100% accurate. If you're not doing the course, then this is, you're going to need to do this whole risk management plan. And the, so the assessment and then the risk treatment plan. So yeah, so there'll be more guidelines. Fulu can post them on the website, and we can also circulate those guidelines and the templates to the people doing the course. All right, so next slide. So next week on Wednesday at the same time, we've got the discussion forum. This is the 4th one. And what we're asking is for any volunteers to give a presentation on the risk assessment assignment. So that's the assignment from the previous webinar. We'd really love to see what some people are coming up with for that risk assessment. So it doesn't have to be the whole detail, but just do a presentation on what you've done. And then if there are any volunteers who want to give a presentation on any risk mitigation activities they've carried out, or any risk monitoring that they're doing. So this can be on a very specific activity. So we can take 4 presentations across these 2 topics. You can email me, preferably by the end of today. And remember, for the course, it counts as your exercise. You have to do some of these exercises. And then in the discussion forum, so we'll have these 4 presentations. They will be short, so probably 7 or 8 minutes each at the most. And then we'll also do more work on identifying the options, selecting the best options, and developing a risk treatment plan in that discussion forum. So it will be a 2-hour discussion forum on this really, really important topic of risk. Okay, so I think that's the end for today.